Alright everyone, this is Mr. Vanderpool continuing talking about short-run aggregate supply here. So we're going to start off by showing another example of an increase in short-run aggregate supply. So in this case we have our ADAS graph and we have a recessionary gap. Output, or Y, isn't quite up to full employment output there, and aggregate demand and short aggregate supply are intersecting before that long run aggregate supply curve. So in this case, what the government might choose to do, what a policymaker might choose to do, is to implement some sort of supply side policy to increase short aggregate supply so you can get back to full employment output. Remember, the idea in these macroeconomic policies is to get back to full employment output. So let's say a policymaker might decide, let's say like the Congress and the President might decide that they want to cut business taxes. Business taxes would affect the short-run aggregate supply curve. So by cutting taxes, they are going to increase short-run aggregate supply. Okay, so the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the right, okay, from SRAS to SRAS1. Now you're at full employment output. So after the short-run aggregate supply curve shifted from SRAS to SRAS1, you're back at full employment output. So where aggregate demand meets SRAS1, you're at full employment output. And you can see that push down the price level, that pushed up output back to full employment output, which was the goal of the cut in business taxes. So if you implemented some sort of policy that pushed down input prices, pushed up productivity, lessened regulation, lessened taxes, that's going to imply that the short aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the right. And you can see after that curve shifts to the right, it's going to push up real GDP, it's going to push down the price level, which implies that the unemployment rate is going to fall. It moves the opposite way of real GDP. And the inflation rate is going to fall because it moves the same way as price level. So notice with these supply side policies, you're actually increasing output and lowering price level, which is kind of a nice thing about a supply side policy. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at a decrease in short aggregate supply. So we're going to have our ADAS right here, and in this case we're at full employment output. Aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply are intersecting at the long-run aggregate supply curve, and we're going to have a decrease in short-run aggregate supply. So the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left from SRAS to SRAS1. Based on a policy that would increase input prices, lower productivity, and or add more regulation, increase taxes, etc. So after our short aggregate supply curve shifted to the left from SRAS to SRAS1, we have a new equilibrium where aggregate demand meets SRAS1. We have our new price level, which is P1, and we have our new output, which is Y1. So when input prices go up, productivity goes down, and or there is more regulation, more taxes. That's going to imply that the short aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left, which is going to imply that real GDP is going to fall, and the price level is going to go up, which implies that the unemployment rate is going to go up, and the inflation rate is also going to go up. Now, when the unemployment rate is going up and the inflation rate is going up, this is given a special name. That name is called stagflation. Okay, when you have rising unemployment and rising inflation, it is called stagflation. And stagflation, ladies and gentlemen, is not a good thing for an economy. Unemployment is rising and inflation is rising. What economists call the misery index, which is unemployment plus inflation, is rising. It's really a bad thing. So always remember that if you have this combination of unemployment going up and inflation going up, that is called stagflation. When you have a decrease in short-run aggregate supply, if you're at full employment output and you have this decrease in short-run aggregate supply where it shifts to the left, that is given a name as well. That is called a supply shock, okay, because we are decreasing supply in a somewhat dramatic fashion here. And so when the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the left from full employment output, you have what's called a supply shock. And whenever you have a supply shock, that is going to lead to stagflation, where the unemployment rate is going to be going up and the inflation rate is going to be going up. All right, let's do an ADAS summary here. So if we have a change in consumption, gross private investment, government spending at exports, that is going to change aggregate demand. When aggregate demand shifts to the right, that implies that real GDP goes up, price level goes up, which implies that the unemployment rate is going to fall and the inflation rate is going to go up. When aggregate demand shifts to the left, that implies that real GDP is going to fall and price level is going to fall, which is going to imply that the unemployment rate is going to go up and the inflation rate is going to go down. When we have a change in input prices, productivity, and or regulation slash taxes, we're going to have a change in our short-run aggregate supply curve. When the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right, that implies that the real GDP is going to go up, price level is going to go down, which implies that the unemployment rate falls and that the inflation rate is going to fall. When the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the left, that implies that real GDP is going to fall, price level is going to go up, which implies that the unemployment rate goes up and the inflation rate also goes up. And remember, when that inflation rate and unemployment rate are going up at the same time, you have what is called stagflation. So this ADAS model is by far the most important graph in AP macroeconomics. You need to be sure that you do know it. All right, now I want to show you another ADAS model called the new Keynesian model. And this type of model sometimes shows up on the AP test, but not often. So generally in class we're going to use the new classical model that we've been using, but I do want to at least introduce you to this new Keynesian model, so that way if it does show up on the test, you're not totally thrown off. So with the new Keynesian model of ADAS, it's going to look like this. You're going to have price level on your y-axis. You're going to have real GDP, also known as Q or Y, on your x-axis, and then aggregate supply is going to be divided into three sections. You're going to have the Keynesian range, okay, which is where you have a low price level, you have low output, it's associated with the Great Depression. And then you're going to have an intermediate range, which is going to be upward sloping. And then you're going to have a vertical range, which is called the classical range and is associated with classical economists like Adam Smith, Say, Ricardo, etc. So aggregate supply is, like I said, broken into three sections in this new Keynesian model. So where you want aggregate demand to be is right where you want it to intersect where the intermediate range intersects at the classical range. So right at the top of the intermediate range is where you want aggregate demand to be. And right below aggregate supply there, you are at full employment output, or YF. So once again, this new Keynesian model, you might see it on the AP test, but generally we're going to use the new classical model in this class. All right, now I want to go ahead and talk about what can shift the long-run aggregate supply curve. The long-run aggregate supply curve can shift. It is possible. It doesn't happen all that often, but it can happen. So, what shifts long-run aggregate supply? Okay, productivity, quality and quantity of natural resources, capital stock, health and education, and technology. You might notice these are the same things that will shift a production possibilities curve. And that is true. Okay, those 5 things that shift along the aggregate supply curve will actually shift a production possibilities curve to the left or to the right. So let's say you had an increase in productivity, quantity, quality of natural resources, capital stock, health and education, and technology. All that, any of that actually, would shift the long run aggregate supply curve to the right. Okay. So now we are at our new long run aggregate supply curve here. Okay, so we have that increase in productivity, increase in quantity, quality of natural resources, increase in capital stock, increase in health and technology, and education. That increased the longer aggregate supply curve, shifting it to the right. You have a slight push down of the price level. But now, your full employment output has shifted to the right, has increased because of that increase in long-run aggregate supply. So economists, one of their big goals is you want to have long-run economic growth, which is symbolized by the long-run aggregate supply shifting to the right. So an increase in productivity, increased quality and quantity of natural resources, increase in capital stock, increase in health and education, increase in technology are some of the best things for an economy, because that promotes long-run economic growth and the long-run aggregate supply curve shifting to the right. So one thing I do want to differentiate for you guys. So changes in productivity, quantity, quality of natural resources, capital stock, health and education, and technology are going to shift the long-run aggregate supply curve. Remember, the short-run aggregate supply curve is changed by input prices, legal institutional environment, and the only thing that overlaps is productivity. So if it's short-run productivity gains, it's going to affect the short-run aggregate supply. Long-run productivity gains are going to affect the long-run aggregate supply. Okay, so be sure that you keep those determinants separate. The ones that will shift the long-run aggregate supply and those that will shift the short-run aggregate supply. You don't want to confuse them. All right, let's move on to the assessment here. So for number 1, we're going to go back to just graphing ADAS graphs, shifting the short aggregate supply curve the correct way, and telling me what happened to price level, real GDP, unemployment, and inflation. So we're going to graph and explain what would happen to the equilibrium price level, real GDP, unemployment, and inflation in the short run if the economy is in full employment equilibrium and there was a decrease in government regulation. So go ahead and shift the short run aggregate supply curve the correct way and tell me what happens to price level, real GDP, unemployment, and inflation. And for number 2, we're going to graph and explain what would happen to the equilibrium price level, real GDP, unemployment, and inflation rate in the short run if the economy is in full employment equilibrium, so full employment output, and there is an increase in input prices. Okay, so start off with a graph, ADAS graph in equilibrium, shift short run aggregate supply the right way. Tell me what happened to price level, real GDP, unemployment, and inflation. Okay, so very similar to the examples that I gave you. All right, so you can pause if you need to. Otherwise, we're moving on here. For the summary, in a paragraph, describe what you've learned today. And we'll go ahead and I'll check these tomorrow. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.